than 500 prison officers in England have been fired in the past 5 years for serious offences. There's also been a huge rise in the number of suspected incidents of prison officer corruption. And the temptation is huge. One serving officer told us for every phone smuggled into prison, you could get paid £2,000. A former governor says the corruption is being fuelled by drugs and the gangs behind them. It comes as prisons are in crisis due to widespread overcrowding and staff stretched to breaking point. Sam Holder has this special report.
£100,000 of phones and drugs smuggled in. Running a neo-Nazi group. Class A drugs hidden in orange juice cartons. All of these offences were carried out by prison officers. ITV News has uncovered that in England, on average, over the past 5 years, a member of prison staff is fired for serious offences every 4 days. So who is really in charge of Britain's prisons? And what is causing these problems? I'm meeting a serving prison officer. We'll call him Tom because he's hiding his identity. And he's seen corruption firsthand, including one officer who was only caught because there was a surprise inspection.
They've got dogs there. Everyone's been patted down, shoes taken off.
There's more security than normal.
He's tried to make a runner and he's been tackled. And when they tackled him, somebody's opened up his bag. He must have had about 20 phones inside. You could be making £2,000 per phone. So you're looking at a hell of a lot of money there. I've actually had inmates directly talk to me and asking me to bring something in. Obviously, I've turned them down. And their response to that was, well, other officers do it, so why can't you? It's easy.
And how much would you have been offered to do something like that?
£2,000.
You carry one bag of phones, you might double your salary for the year.
Or triple it.
There have been allegations that members of criminal organisations are intentionally taking jobs within prisons to facilitate crime within prisons. Is that something you're aware of?
There was a time where we had a female colleague that went through the whole process of getting the job. But she only done that because I don't know whether it was her boyfriend, fiancé or husband was inside at the time. But she only got found out because other inmates were calling her by her street name.
We found a 270% increase in suspected corruption in English prisons since 2020. Staff and prisoners have told us about lonely officers being groomed by criminal gangs in male prisons. Male officers offered companionship, female officers reeled in by romance. Like Hannah Angwaba, who tried to smuggle tens of thousands of pounds of drugs after being exploited by a prisoner she thought she was in a relationship with. And Stephanie Heaps, who secretly married a convicted murderer and ended up helping his criminal organisation. Dawn McCormack was jailed after exchanging more than 4,000 texts with a prisoner at HMP The Mount. John Podmore is a former governor and headed the corruption prevention unit across the entire prison service. He says drugs are fuelling crime in prisons.
I would say that the drug trade in prisons in this country, across all prisons, is probably worth about £1 billion.
Just within prisons?
Yes. You know, I worry at the moment that who's in control.
So are you saying that essentially in some prisons, serious organised criminals are actually the ones in charge?
Yes, I am. Well, if you've got a prison where 77% of the prisoners are testing positive for drugs, well, certainly the staff aren't in charge, the governor isn't in charge. Prison officers in this country, they're receiving as little as 6 or 7 weeks training. It used to be 12 weeks. It's now been reduced, and that was a crazy decision. If you're a young officer on the landing, you might be responsible for 50 or 60 prisoners. You might be there on your own. We're taking young, vulnerable staff, asking them to do an enormously difficult job, and then throwing them to the wolves.
Prisoners aren't allowed phones, let alone to post videos online, but clips are all over social media. The phones can be used to orchestrate drug deals outside prison. It's a sign of the lack of control. Pia Sinha worked as a governor at several public sector prisons.
The risk of having prisons that are overrun and overcrowded is that there becomes a vacuum of leadership in prisons. And when that happens, the people, the staff, stop being in charge, and that vacuum is filled by criminality. Recruitment is done through a centrally controlled, separate organisation. And the worst point is the governors are sitting in their offices, tied up, doing complicated HR processes in order to get rid of people that they didn't want in their jails in the first place.
Overstretched, understaffed, prisons have long been described as at breaking point. It's through those cracks, according to these former governors, that criminal organisations have slipped through.
Well, Sam, this is shocking. Is it really alarming figures? What's the Ministry of Justice said about this?
Well, we asked the Justice Secretary if she wanted to take part in an interview, but that was turned down. So instead we got a statement. And the Ministry of Justice say that while the overwhelming majority of prison staff are hardworking and honest, we're catching more of the small minority who break the rules. This includes by bolstering our counter-corruption unit and strengthening our vetting processes. They also say where officers do fall below our high standards, we'll always take robust action. Now, Mary, I thought you might be interested in hearing how I started looking into this. And it was actually because I was at the inquest of a man who was shot dead by the police during an attempted escape from a prison van. And what I couldn't believe was that in court, all the lawyers from all the different sides were in agreement that prison officer corruption is so rampant that the police, who'd got wind of this escape plot, needed to carry out their investigation in secret. Otherwise, the criminal organisation would be tipped off. And I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. So I started doing more digging, putting in freedom of information requests and speaking to people from across the prison service. And I think we've now got a picture of how serious this issue is. And while the Ministry of Justice are right that it is only a minority of prison staff, it only takes a few to undermine the entire system.
But first, ITV News has learned that more than 500 prison officers